Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaya Namo Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vaivacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Dhanyavad Pranam devotees. So this morning, I'm not really doing a question and answer per se, but just speaking to a conversation I had based on being invited to attend a seminar on a, for lack of a better word, it's like a understanding of Bhakti in relation to growing our fullest potential in terms of our material life, our material existence. So I declined, both because of time and also because of really lack of interest, basically. So I also want to preface, before I begin speaking about what I want to speak about today, that I'm also unfolding and trying to mature in the process of Sudha Bhakti. So I'm always speaking, on any time I'm answering questions or anything else, for my own edification, and the idea of doing either question and answers, or in this case just speaking to a topic by sharing it live or sharing it in this form, is so that if there's any opportunity for Vaishnav Seva or Guru Seva, then that Kripa may come to help me in this unfolding process. So there's simultaneously a desire to appeal to the mercy of Vaishnavas, that I may get their blessings to continue to grow, which is the inspiration under which we're doing things like public explanations and answering questions and so forth, so on. Internally, for myself, it's all for my own edification and trying to, again, grow and mature in Sudha Bhakti. So I wanted to caveat my speaking with that understanding, and also not give any intention here of being dismissive, critical, or anything else that may not appear to be nourishing to any individual's pursuit of their unfolding process in Bhakti. So let me, with all of that said, state the basic topic that we're speaking about. And the topic is that until and unless self-interest is removed, then the process of Bhakti cannot go forward with any expediency. What checks Bhakti from moving forward in a very expedient fashion is the holding on to self-interest. Sometimes we'll just say, well, because of material desires. But material desires are impressions that have come into the chitta from the entire sojourn of our being in the material world, which has been from Anadikal. So it is not very easy to simply remove material desires. Generally, what happens in Bhakti, two things. One is just the Kripa of Mahabhagavad Vaishnav comes and completely removes everything by awarding you Bhakti, or through the normal process, as Srila Rupa Goswami Padma Guru Vargas have stated, through the unfolding process and incremental stages of Bhakti, then the influence of the internal energy of the Lord starts to displace the tendency for material desires. So in terms of wanting gross material enjoyment, that gradually gets displaced by involvement in the process of Bhakti. But here, the question arises as to why sometimes we don't find that our material desires are more quickly being removed. And in part is though we may have a desire not to want to engage in various material activities and material desires, the root of material desire, which is self-interest, is still present. And we tend to look more at the external manifestation in terms of different kinds of material desires as being the problem, and we don't as much concentrate on the root, which is actually the self-interest, which is embedded in the consciousness of the jiva throughout their entire sojourn in the material world. Everyone takes self-interest. This is the very nature of what it means to be in avidya, right? I've explained avidya many times, avidya, without knowledge of our actual nature and our actual intended purpose. Our intended purpose is to serve and to love God. But that intended purpose is obfuscated due to a lack of spiritual potency, meaning internal energy being present. And therefore, from time without any beginning, we have been subjected to kind of imposed identities which are not our true identity. And on the basis of that, self-interest has become prominent, right? So with that self-interest being prominent, it becomes very difficult to then ward off various kinds of material energy, because even, and here's the crux of my speaking today, that even when we're engaged in the process of trying to realize, understand, and execute our intended purpose, which is to love and serve God, self-interest creeps into that process and therefore doesn't really leave. So then we still end up struggling with the continual waves of material desires coming into the consciousness and having to deal with, hopefully by intelligence and by strength of bhakti in our mental conviction, we don't accept those things, so we don't act on them. But still the waves of those things continue to come. And the reason is because the root has not been taken care of. In Sriman Bhagavatam, we were studying the other day in one class where it says, Tapotray unmulanam. So tapotray means the suffering of the three kinds of material miseries. Aryatmik, Adi Bhautik, Adi Daivik, means those miseries caused by one's own body and mind, those caused by interactions with others, and those caused by the demigods. Also just meaning here, Adi Daivik means also by fate, by the influence of karma and other things. So it doesn't just mean those which are caused by the sort of universal authorities. So, but also tapotra unmulana means the influence of the three modes of material nature and the suffering that comes as a result of identifying with them. So unmulanam is the important word here. Unmulanam means it is uprooted. It is not like you cut grass, and when you're cutting grass, you cut the top of the grass and it shrinks the grass down to what appears to be a nice, appreciable level. So you look and say, oh, the lawn looks very beautiful. The grass has been cut, right? So in the same way, by the taking away of engagement in some material activities and material desires, it's like a manicured lawn. So it's tolerable. It appears even attractive and beautiful. But the root of the grass has not been removed. So the grass is going to grow again. In the same way, self-interest is the root of all material desires. And as long as that root remains, then material desires will continue to reappear. And then again, you cut them by the influence of your practice of bhakti, they reappear again. So tapo try unmulanam here means, unmulanam means that the genuine process of bhakti, this is getting more central to our point, the true practice of bhakti uproots the influence of the three modes of material nature and the various kind of miseries that come as a result of that. So when we look at bhakti, then we have to think, if that uprooting of material desires is not taking place, it means the root is still present. And I've mentioned this root is self-interest. So then the question becomes, how does this self-interest, first of all, maintain its presence even in the face of the practice of bhakti. So in Bhagavad Gita, this is chapter 7, verse 16, I'm going to read both the verse and the purport, because I think our Srila Prabhupada, as he has done in every single translation and purport, masterfully give an explanation and understanding of why and how, even in the practice of bhakti, we are not really truly being able to uproot that self-interest, right? Because the bhakti remains on the level of one of four categories. So let me read this verse and then we'll get into it more. So Chatyavirai Bhajantimam Jana Sukritino Arjuna Arto Jigyasya Artarti Gyani Cha Bharata Shabha. So he says, oh, best among the Bharats, four kinds of Sukritina means people looking for practicing pious life, right? Four kinds of pious persons come and begin the idea of rendering devotional service, right? So surely in the translation is to render devotional service means to, with the attempt at changing their lives, right? They come and they begin to render devotional service. Those four categories are those who are distressed, right? Arto means they're suffering some kind of difficulty. And in most cases, it's a difficulty related to the nature of the fact that the material world is duality, right? And in this duality, there is happiness and distress. Because that is counter to the actual nature of the jiva, which is ananda, unfettered ananda, then there's always this difficulty of feeling distress. That difficulty, distress, misery is not in the Atma itself. It is in the vicarious identification with the material world. So those persons who are distressed, those persons who are inquisitive, and here inquisitive means I'm considering there must be something else, because the material world has not borne out my aspirations for happiness, peace, love, or any other thing that we look at the material world to provide, that because of its dual nature doesn't fully do that, right? So then curiosity, is there something else beyond this material which I can look into, which may facilitate or fulfill that desire I have for actual happiness? They're called jigyashu. They're inquisitive about the alternative to the material world. That inquisitive nature goes everywhere from I just want to find some way to get rid of the suffering in the material world, all the way up to the idea of what is the nature of spirituality? What is beyond the material world, right? Then aratati, right? So this means those who actually want material gain. So though they've taken to the process of spiritual life, they've seen it as a modality by which they can obtain their material desires, right? Somehow or another, by some understanding, they've realized that a power beyond material energy is required to produce what it is I desire to happen. So they look, where can I find a superior power to just the material elements? Oh, well, if I practice spirituality, then by the basis of that spiritual power, which they will consider superior to material energy, I'll get my material desires fulfilled, right? So one instance of that, of course, in Sriman Bhagavatam is the charit, or narration of the story of Dhruva Maharaj, right? So then Gyanicha. Gyanicha means those who have some knowledge of what's beyond this material world. And therefore, they're also looking to more definitively try to enter into the spiritual paradigm, right? And give up the material dealings. But those who are Gyanicha are also on so many different levels. Their rooted self-interest may still be in obtaining salvation. I don't want to suffer anymore. It may be in obtaining for myself spiritual happiness. Material happiness failed me, but spiritual happiness, I'll enjoy that. Therefore, it leads to ideas of Sayuja Mukti or Brahmananda, or just Atma Ananda, being free from any influence of the material energy, and even concepts like Nirvana, being void, just don't be anything because all my experiences have been filled with material misery. I just don't want to exist anymore as anything, right? So a nihilistic philosophy of like nirvana, I just want to be void of any kind of feeling, personality, anything. So all the way up to practicing bhakti with the idea, and Srila Rupa Goswami Pad has given these definitions of the subtlety of, I don't want to use the word contaminations, but the lack of completely pure devotion. One is called Shukya Aishwarya Utta Bhakti. It means observing the beauty and opulence of Vaikuntha, I want to go there. I will serve Lord Narayan because Lord Narayan will be happy and therefore I will also be happy. You understand? And a similar mood when it is in the aspiration for Braja, for the moods of Braj, it is called Prem Seva Uttra Bhakti. So here, it means bhakti in which my love for Sri Krishna in the mood like Brijabasis have will also be my happiness, right? So my self-interest, even at the highest level of spiritual attainment, is still mixed in. You understand? So Gyani Cha can go from the base level of Atmananda all the way up to Prem Seva Uttra, right? The desire to enjoy loving Krishna. You understand? And not strictly for Krishna's pleasure. So now let's read out Srila Prabhupada's purport because it's very interesting, even the first paragraph, how he begins. Unlike the miscreants, he means those who have no desire to take to any kind of spiritual process. These adherents of the regulative principles of the scriptures, so those who are sukritina, those who say, well, listen, I have to follow the dharmic rules and regulations of religion, whether it's upadharmic religion or whether it's Sanatan Dharma, whatever it might be, I have to follow that, even for the idea of not having to be accountable for the repercussions of not following it, right? So in this case, it may not even be for a genuine interest in serving God, but simply because I don't want to suffer having understood that it's important to follow the scriptural rules and regulations which are meant for mankind. So Srila Prabhupada says they are called sukritina, right? Or those who obey the rules and regulations of scriptures, the moral and social laws, and are more or less devoted to the Supreme Lord. So more or less, right? So he's giving an indication. They're also practicing some religious activity. They have some recognition of God. It may not be with an aspiration to love and serve God as much as it is, well, I realize that I have to follow these things for the sake of morality, for instance. He quotes that. Social laws. How we have social interactions really, in one sense, is based in reality in some kind of spiritual conception. Other than that, people would just have no morality and no social construct about how they deal with each other, and therefore they do whatever they want. And the fact that we see that taking place more and more is indicative of the decline of any kind of spiritual or religious inclinations. That you see people just wantonly willing to harm or do violence to other people for no reason, right? Now, we say, well, this is a mental illness or whatever the case might be, but that hasn't had its genesis from nowhere. The genesis of it is in the lack of any kind of spiritual fortitude or spiritual fabric. So out of that has grown mental conditions which socially are abnormal, and we call it a mental condition. But that leads to people doing abominable things to other people with no feeling of remorse or anything else, right? And I don't want to make a political issue here or anything, but even in the idea of the promotion of the idea of killing children even before they're born. I mean, there is a certain kind of, and there's one thing to talk about these social issues regarding economics and socio-political dynamics, but all of that aside, all of that put in its place, looking at the ability of having a child and having the ability for the mentality to arise, oh, I'll just snuff the life of the child out, right? Because of whatever social dynamics became manifest in my life, that I don't want this pregnancy, right? That even is a situation in which we've kind of seen there's no filter left, that this still is a life. This is the process of life. Even to the point where there's been attempts to define it as being something less than the process of life. It is some kind of scientific phenomenon. It is some kind of biological phenomenon, right? But actually, it is the process of life itself. So you can't get away from that. Nobody came here by immaculate conception. If you did, put it in the comments. But other than that, everybody came through that same process of life. So the idea of the ability to snuff that life out, and men and women who agreed to it are equally responsible for it, right? So I don't want to raise that as a whole separate issue. I'm just mentioning it in context to what happens when there is no spiritual fabric whatsoever, and in context to when I'm speaking, why some people do say at least I need to follow scriptural rules and regulations or some path of dharma, right? Some faith in something, right? Because they do have some kind of moral fabric, right? So he says, out of these four classes, right, of men, those who are sometimes distressed, those who are in need of, and here, artha arti means those who want to gain facility for their enjoyment. It doesn't always mean money. It could mean just my happiness in any field of material activity, right? So normally, because that can be produced by wealth, the mention of money is here. But generally, it refers to just attainment of my happiness, right? So those persons also realizing, again, as I mentioned earlier, that I may get some help from the spiritual energy to produce my material facility, they take shelter of spiritual life. Those who are sometimes inquisitive, I talked about those persons also, and those who are actually searching for the absolute truth, right? And the motive for searching for the absolute truth, I mentioned maybe everything from wanting to get free from material suffering all the way up to the idea of enjoying Bhagavan, either in Aishwarya or Madhurya, right? So, Srila Prabhu says, these persons come to the Supreme Lord for devotional service under different conditions. These are not pure devotees. Let me repeat that. These are not pure devotees. So coming to the process of bhakti is not axiomatically pure devotion. Because Srila Prabhupada said, if the root of self-interest in one of these four categories, in any myriad of expansions of these four categories, it is not pure devotion. The simple practice itself is not pure devotion. There has to be some basis under which it becomes pure practice. So let's continue reading and we'll come to that, right? These are not pure devotees because they have some aspiration to fulfill in exchange for devotional service. This is called self-interest. Pure devotional service is without aspiration and without desire for any material profit. Means the result of your self-interest, there can't be any aspiration for that. The Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, then he quotes from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, defines what is pure devotion. And we all know this verse, Anya Abhilasita Sunyam Gyana Karmadya Navratam Anukulina Krishnanusiranam Bhaktir Uttam. So Uttama Bhakti is that Bhakti which is rendered. I'm going to read Srila Prabhupada's translation of this verse. One should render transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord, Shri Krishna, favorably and without desire for any material profit, which means with no self-interest or gain through any kind of fruitive activities of philosophical speculation. That is called pure devotional service. So in the very first line, Anya Abhilasita Sunyam. Anya Abhilas. So Anya means another. Abhilas means desire. Right? So he says, Anya Abhilas. We should be sunya of any other Abhilas. So here there's indication that there is a desire which is okay. Because it says other desire. It doesn't say be sunya of any abhilas. It says anya abhilas, any other desire. Right? And then it qualifies what desire you should have in the what's called Swarup Lakshan of this verse, the main part of this verse. So here it's saying anya abhilas sunya. But a suffix is added, ita. Ita means a condition. So it is not contrary to being anya abhilas if the condition of your life or something else which under natural circumstances we may say, oh, God help me. Like if your life is in jeopardy or you're going through some great material life-threatening situation and you call out and you say, oh, Krishna help me. The example given in Sastra here is Draupadi, right? That Draupadi, when she was about to be disrobed, and we know according to Bhagavad Gita, dishonor is worse than death for those who follow the path of Dharma. So because she was about to be disrobed, she called out, hey, Govinda, save me. You understand? And then, of course, we know the story. Krishna manifested his opulence and manifested the unlimited sari of Draupadi. So many things in this, I don't want to sidetrack because there's many beautiful things in this as well. But the point here being, is it considered that Draupadi, to save her honor, had another abhilas? No. Under that condition, it was not considered a breach of anya abhilas because those conditions are extraordinary. But in ordinary everyday life, oh God, give me a nice house, give me a good job, give me a better wife or husband, oh give me this, give me that, etc. Then this is anya abhilas. And it is rooted in self-interest. You understand? So, jnana karma adi anavritam. So, this practice of pure bhakti should not be overtaken. Anavrita means, avrita means covered. Anavrita means not covered. So, it should not be covered by gyan, or knowledge that seeks one's self-interest in the spiritual paradigm. I want to realize my soul so I cannot suffer. I want to realize Bhagavan and become one with Bhagavan so I can enjoy like Bhagavan. This is gyan in pursuit of the spiritual self-interest, right? Not the interest of loving and serving Bhagavan, but one's own self-interest. That kind of gyan should be given up. And karma, right? Any kind of activities which feed self-interest and don't feed anukulyena krishnanusilanam, endeavors to please Krishna, any kind of activities which don't feed that. So it says karma adi. So not only activities, but anything that does not feed or that covers the mood of anukulyena Krishna anusilanam is not pure bhakti. So this is important because let me before I finish the purport here, let me come to why, as I started out this class, I was invited to attend a seminar which dealt essentially with how, through the practice of bhakti, your material life can be made whole. I'm just summarizing because it was more than that. It was how to deal with interpersonal, interpersonal trauma and this and that, and how your life can unfold. So it more or less dealt with the application of bhakti, right, in any of these four categories or some offspring of these four categories, and our self-interest in relation to bhakti. So because, as I mentioned, I do these things to my own edification to advance and mature in Sudha Bhakti, right, which is bhakti void of these things, that would not be favorable to my practice. Now, everything is not like a drawn line. So everybody, therefore, you can't do that, right? A lot of what has come into the Vaishnava Mundo has come from the modality of the preaching mission. We want to preach. We want to spread Krishna consciousness. In wanting to do that, a lot of ingenuity and a lot of inventiveness, if that's a word, went into producing different vehicles to carry that out, right? So at some point, there was a kind of let's make peace with the entire New Age dynamic. And in the New Age dynamic, which was strictly centered in self-interest modalities, right? In other words, how I can better my life, how I can better my health, how I can better this, that, this, right? All centered in essentially self-interest modalities, using spiritual energy, either quasi-spiritual energy or in some cases, somebody genuinely practicing some form of yoga, bhakti, something, using that energy to do that, right? So looking at that and looking at the success of it, because of course most people in the material world have self-interest, right? And they started looking to these kinds of alternative modalities of yoga, this thing, that thing, in order to accomplish it, right? Then why don't we take up those modalities and try to somehow bridge Krishna consciousness with those modalities, and that will make our preaching more successful. So the intention originally and the ingenuity around the intention was not bad per se, right? Because everybody is at different levels of karmic experience. So not everybody is going to have bhakti sanskars that would lead them to join the temple, shave your head, surrender your life, etc., right? That became a realization that people had, that wasn't going to happen. So these alternative methods for introducing Krishna consciousness seem to be very good. One problem arose, and that's that anything you do, you need to make an investment of time and some degree faith in that thing for it to be effective. If you want to be an effective businessman, you have to invest time and energy in the things that make you successful as a businessman. Musician, athlete, whatever it is you do, that same requirement of some devotion of faith and energy, etc., is required. So once those who were on the path of aspiration and bhakti started down this path, then a lot of attention, some faith investment, and everything went into making that happen. The result was that devotees started to feel themselves very good by that process, because those modalities are meant to satisfy that root idea of self-interest via primarily the mode of goodness and quasi-spirituality, right? So there was a sense of, oh, I feel good when we sit around and we have, life coaching sessions in which we sit and we basically talk about me. Or if I'm on the end of being the life coach, I'm talking about you. There's a good sense of the mode of goodness reverberating through our association. And in Bhagavad Gita, it clearly mentions that the mode of goodness does two things. It conditions one to a kind of false sense of knowledge and certainly a false sense of happiness, right? Because here false sense means that though it is happiness based on the predominance of the mode of goodness over passion and ignorance, it is not pure, because there is no state of pure material goodness, right? It always has some influence of passion and some maybe very minor influence of ignorance, but it's not absolutely 100% pure. You can't have the modes completely pure. There's no pure mode of passion or even pure mode of ignorance. So, but because of that reverberation of the mode of goodness, and because it's about me, either on the giving end or the receiving end, there seems to be some natural reciprocation in that makes me feel good. And because I've done it under the auspices of preaching and doing bhakti, it's bhakti. Or so we think, right? And therefore, a kind of happiness evolves from it, and an enthusiasm takes place in it. And that enthusiasm and happiness now starts to become what we consider to be a taste in bhakti. And therefore, it becomes very difficult to give up, because it's predominated by the mode of goodness. And one of those features is mode of goodness, sattva gun, conditions one, right? So that's the operative word, conditions one to happiness expressed in the mode of goodness, right? So because Suddha Sattva, pure goodness, is transcendent, right? It's not something that evolves from our self-interest, but according to this verse that we just read and Srila Prabhupada's beginning of his purport, it evolves from no self-interest on either side of that giving or taking phenomenon. Because there are people who enjoy as much being the life coach as the person being coached. There's such a reciprocation in the idea of feeling a sense of elation. I'm giving you the skills to make your life happy, to avoid your trauma, to get rid of your past karmic impressions that are creating misery in your life, right? And developing a whole modality and an outline of activities around that, it becomes very exciting and it feels good. Because for one, it's in the mode of goodness, and for two, it is affiliated if you're practicing Bhakti or you've come in the line of Mahaprabhu, it's affiliated with the idea of doing missionary activity or preaching. You understand? So, as a result of that, self-interest is rather being watered. Remember in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was describing the Bhakti Lata Bij, he mentioned the growth of upasakas. Upasaka means things which are connected to, related to, or have some semblance of the actual creeper of bhakti. And they grow along with the Bhakti Lata Bij. So when you're watering, you're chanting every day Hare Krishna, except you're going to Mangalarti, you're doing your seva to Thakurji, your deities, everything, then you're providing a kind of spiritual potency, watering your devotional creeper. That's what it's meant for. But when it starts to give more energy, because of the remnant of self-interest that's there, to the upasakas or the weeds that are around the creeper of devotion, they grow stronger and anavritam. Not anavritam, but avritam. Avrita means to cover. Anavrita means to not cover. So avrita, they begin to cover the bhakti lata and they become prominent. They soak up the nourishment of your practice and they become prominent. And therefore, your feeling of your own personal happiness in that regard starts to dominate, and therefore less interest in looking at bhakti as something completely selfless and only dedicated to the anukul seva of Krishna becomes less, and the dominance of doing something related to Krishna, this is called Arop Siddha Bhakti, doing something related to Krishna for my happiness becomes prominent. Therefore, the root of material desire, which is self-interest, is nourished rather than uprooted. You understand? So every time I read scripture, I start looking at the scripture as a template to apply to this modality. Right? So I start looking. The Bhagavad Gita is wonderful because it has so many instructive stories about how people's lives can become better. But Bhagavad Gita, if you're looking at it from the mode of Anukul Seva to Krishna, the interest in the study of Bhagavad Gita is, how am I going to serve Krishna through the study of Bhagavad Gita? So now when you look near the end of Bhagavad Gita, one verse is there. One who reads this Bhagavad Gita worships me by his intelligence. And what is that intelligence? Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam. How you can come to me in love. But if your approach to reading the verses of Bhagavad Gita is how that's going to make my life better, it's still imbued with one of the four kinds of self-interest. And therefore, Krishna does not reciprocate with giving pure bhakti when your intention is not pure. According to your bhajan, right, Krishna is reciprocating with that. So if your desire is to taste happiness in the mode of goodness by your study and application to others of Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam or any other Shastra, Krishna will reciprocate with that. You'll be happy. You'll feel a sense of happiness that, oh, I'm preaching and this is wonderful. I'm feeling happy. The person I'm life coaching or preaching to or whatever is feeling happy. But in that case, by deep analysis, is either your giving of Bhagavad Gita Katha or the person receiving it in the mode of Anukulena Krishna Anusilanam. Now, one of the things that may come up is, well, wait, everybody's not at the level of Anukulena Krishna Anusilanam. Everybody's not on that platform. So we're doing this as a stepping stone to come to that platform. But here's the difficulty. Remember that the material mode of goodness conditions one. So what you're actually doing is reinforcing conditioning, right? You cannot reinforce something and expect its waning in lieu of obtaining something superior, right? In other words, you cannot put out the fire of sense gratification by overindulgence in it, right? So obviously in our unfolding process, there's some incremental, dealings with material energy and getting rid of sense gratification and so forth and so on, right? And no one is to be held at fault for that. Even Srimad Bhagavatam very clearly says, what is that verse? Japta sharo matkateshu nirvigna savakarmashu. Vedudukatmanam kamam parityagyopi anishvara. It may be, truly, that somebody has developed some shraddha in hearing Harikatha, practicing bhakti, etc., etc. But still, they've not overcome all the obstacles of material life. So Bhagavatam is saying itself, no, don't have any fear here. This is not problematic. If your intention is towards pure bhakti, because gradually, by the influence of pure bhakti, gradually, certainly, these things will be overcome. So if somebody has some difficulty, struggles with something from their previous samskars, oh, no, this will not be a big problem. Gradually, at some point, the influence of Bhagavan Shakti, Swarup Shakti, will certainly clear that thing out. Right? Raso Rajam, Raso Piyasha, Param Drishanavartate. Gradually, some ruchi, some taste will come, and that thing will be cleared out. But if you reinforce it, if you stimulate it, if you water it by self-interest, right, then that thing won't go away. It'll keep cycling. And what happens then is you start to accommodate it as just part of what you consider bhakti to be. Right? And then the problem with that is that a further outgrowth of that idea becomes, listen, since it doesn't appear that my practice of bhakti in sadhana, etc., is going to yield purity, I will defer to the idea of kripa. So this is where the idea is, it doesn't really matter whether my practice has yielded purity or not. When I die, the mercy of Guru will take me back to Godhead. And then that starts to revert back to a Judeo-Christian concept of the idea of salvation. I may not genuinely apply the idea in deep attempt to become Anukulena Krishna Anusilanam. But I'll go back to Godhead anyway, because my Gurudev will show me mercy and take me back to Godhead. So you can see how problems start to stack one on top of the other. You understand? From this idea. So, Mukunda, you're speaking all of these things, but where is the place then of these kinds of activities? Because they were generated, as I myself mentioned, from a sincere intention to preach. So, where we can get benefit from these things is in understanding the idea that it's not the things themselves which are bhakti or preaching, right? What is the undercurrent which will benefit us is it is an attempt to love and serve my Gurudev and mission. You understand? That meditation is bhakti. It's not the activities themselves. It's not the content of the activities themselves. It is actually the feeling of wanting to render Anukul Seva to Gurudev, who's the manifest form of Shri Krishna in this world for us. Because we have not met Radha Krishna Mahaprabhu. If you have, you're very fortunate. I offer my Dandavat Pranam sincerely. But in this world, our experiences of our Guru Padapadma or our Gurudev. And the desire to please Srila Gurudev is the means to obtain pure bhakti. We're singing every morning. Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasado. Getting the prasad of Bhagavan depends on getting the mercy of Sri Guru. You understand? So that idea to please Srila Guru, to please Sri Gurudev, by carrying out the desire of Srila Gurudev to execute the mission of Mahaprabhu, that Sri Harinam and all of its conception should be spread everywhere. So if this avenue, this bridge, led to a way to do that, oh, very good. But then if I become attached to the modality myself, and my self-interest arises in that dealing, and it dominates even the idea of wanting it to be pleasurable to Sri Guru as the main motive, which is where pure bhakti lies, then we'll only be reciprocated with the idea of happiness. Right? I'll feel very good. I'm in the mode of goodness. I'm doing the right thing. And even I feel it's situated because it's related to bhakti. So those kind of things are called Arop Siddha or Sangha Siddha Bhakti, not Swarup Siddhi Bhakti. Swarup Siddhi Bhakti means that bhakti which follows this verse, anya abhilasita sunya, no self-interest. Anukuliyana Krishna anusilanam. Silanam means, Sanskrit seal dhatu, the root of that word is endeavors. These endeavors are of two types. Chestarup or Karyarup and Bhavrup. So Chestarup or Karyarup means the endeavors themselves, the activity. But accompanying that must be a Bhavrup. Here Bhav doesn't mean the stage of Bhav. It means an intention. Right? So the intention mixed with the activity is what creates anusilanam, a continuous endeavor for anukul seva to Krishna. Right? What makes it anukul? That there is no self-interest like in the Gon Lakshan, means the secondary Lakshan or secondary quality of this verse, which is Anya Abhilasita Sunya. No self-interest. Only the interest of pleasing Guru Parapadma. You understand? So I'm preaching to someone, I'm telling that you're saying your life has some misery, some trauma. So here's something in Bhagavad Gita. Here's something in Srimad Bhagavatam. Here's something in the writings of our acharyas which will help you understand how to get over this misery. So here it's mentioned that these four kinds of people who approach, so you may be speaking to any one of these four kinds of people, just be careful not to then become one yourself by that sangha, right? It mentions they also gradually by association will be helped. So let me go ahead and read the rest of Srila Prabhupada's purport on this. When those four kinds of persons come to the Supreme Lord for devotional service and are completely purified by association of a pure devotee. So if you're preaching, you're representing the pure devotee. So you can't obfuscate that representation by introducing your own pleasure from tasting the mode of material goodness, being the facilitator of that bridged preaching modality. If you do, you're no longer representing Srila Gurudev's intention. You're enjoying, this then becomes a rope siddha bhakti, you're enjoying this process yourself. Right? They also become pure devotees. So if you're preaching and giving people a chance to associate with pure devotees via yourself, so they have vicarious association, or directly through introduction more and more to the pure devotee, then gradually they may also become pure devotees. As far as the miscreants are concerned, for them devotional service is very difficult because their lives are, and Srila Prabhupada hits the key word, selfish. They have no interest in serving Bhagavan. Their lives are completely dominated by self-interest. Irregular and without any spiritual goal. So when selfishness rises to a height where it doesn't have any regularity, there's no controlling it. You do whatever you want to do. And hedonistic format of life is the all in all. I just want to enjoy. Then you do all kinds of things. Like we mentioned earlier, even abominable things, right? And they have no spiritual goals. But even some of them, this is the power of spirituality. So preaching in the modality like that, with this intention to please Gurudev, uncontaminated yourself, may even help them. But even some of them, by chance, when they come in contact with pure devotee, also may eventually become pure devotees. So then Srila Prabhupada goes on to say, and I'll paraphrase the last, not to make this too long. Srila Prabhupada said, people who are engaged always in fruitive activities, they come to the Lord, and at the time they associate with pure devotees and become, let me read this actually. Those who are always busy with fruitive activities come to the Lord in material distress, and at that time associate with pure devotees and become, in their distress, devotees of the Lord. So in other words, he's saying that the very reason, the self-interest reason somebody may come, if they have a pure path, pure, transparent medium to pure devotion, then their distress not only will be moved, but they have an opportunity to enter into transcendence, which is based on pure love and service to Bhagavan. That won't happen if it's obfuscated by our own enjoyment of the preaching modality and being trapped in the mode of goodness. Understand? Which is why, again, back to the original idea, the basis of the seminar was really to devotees. That was really one of the key reasons why I just said, well, no, first of all, I have other things to do, right? We have phone conference every night, so I couldn't attend. But partly because what is the basis of this introduction to devotees? Right? If you're going to do Harikatha, and in doing Harikatha with deep moods of service towards Sri Guru, Guru Vargas, and Mahaprabhu Radhakrishna, that itself is sufficient. Mahamuni Krite Kim Vaparai. Bhagavatam, very second verse, says, what need? Vaparai means any other thing. Once having imbibed the spirit of Srimad Bhagavatam and having that mood in your heart and distributing that mood transparently from the empowerment of your Guru Pada Padma to others, what need is there of anything else? So that these seminars geared towards devotees, for what purpose do we need to hear Sastra to improve our own lives and get rid of this and that? Because then the idea is that pure bhakti somehow or another has been deficient in that category. Sri Harinam, Sri Harikatha, association with pure Vaishnavas is not capable of doing what our seminar will do. You understand? So it becomes a little tricky. If it was a thing, I'm asking devotees to come to a program I'm having for the general public, and the program is based on introducing this kind of bridge modality, that's a different thing. Because you can have some basis of that. I'm trying to serve Gurudev Mahaprabhu's mission. And if I stay transparent and I don't become involved in my own self-interest as the presenter, and I generally am presenting with the idea of bridging people into the path of pure bhakti, all is good. So, anyway, let me finish with Prabhupada's purport because I'll feel complete that way. Those who are simply frustrated also come sometimes to associate with pure devotees and become inquisitive to know about God. Similarly, when the dry philosophers are frustrated in every field of knowledge, they sometimes also want to learn of God. And they come to the Supreme Lord to render devotional service and thus transcend knowledge of the impersonal Brahman or localized Paramatma and come to the personal conception of Godhead by the grace of the Supreme Lord or his pure devotee. On the whole, when the distressed, the inquisitive, the seekers of knowledge, and those who are in need of money are free from all material desires, right? Means free from the root, which is self-interest. Because when you consider being free from all material desires, how many material desires are there? Can anybody give me a number? They're unlimited. But they do have one root, which is self-interest, right? And when they fully understand that material remuneration has nothing to do with spiritual improvement, as long as there's the idea that by improving my material life, I'm going to improve my spiritual life, that illusion, which is the conditioning of the mode of material goodness, will stay fast. You understand? Or be steadfast, rather, in your consciousness, right? So it's saying they have to fully realize that material remuneration of any sort has nothing to do with spiritual improvement. They become pure devotees at that time. As long as such a purified stage is not attained, devotees in the transcendental service to the Lord are tainted by these things, like fruitive activities, search for mundane knowledge, etc. So one has to transcend all of this before one can come to the stage of pure devotional service. So, Srila Prabhupada, just amazing, because he was able to capture the mindset of all of those who would be approaching bhakti, right? Because not like this phenomenon doesn't exist in India, because in India you think there's no fruitive activities, no desire for material gain. Some of the foremost speakers of spiritually backed but materially motivated modalities have come out of India, right? Everything from the yogis and this one and that one and all the New Age phenomena and writing books on this and that. Many have come out. And others in the rest of the world who've picked up on that trend have taken it and made application. It has also seeped into the Vaishnava Mando that yes, because it seems to be a successful preaching modality and perhaps a way I can even dovetail my own living by it, then people take to it as actually a way to make a living as well. So I've expressed, hopefully, in the presentation, both the inherent dangers But the path of success of such kind of preaching, right? There is a narrow path of success for it when it remains transparent to the nature of what is pure bhakti. But there's a big danger that it really requires a continuum of that person presenting to be under guidance of some pure devotee. Because in that way, the continued potency coming from a pure devotee is not lost in that person who's attempting to serve by using that modality. But when you don't have high class of pure Vaishnava Sangha, then you become dominated by the material mode of goodness, and because it feels good, and because you still have some arop, means connection with bhakti, you'll conflate the two things and say, oh, this is bhakti, and you'll feel like this is actually, I've heard the term, some people say, this is real bhakti, because we're really doing the work. I've actually heard those kinds of statements in some passings, right? So it's very important that we understand clearly the difference between those kinds of modalities, which in a detrimental fashion may be presented, and where they may genuinely be bridges to bring the members of the general populace into the arena of pure bhakti. I don't believe they really have a genuine place in the arena of those who've taken to pure bhakti. Those who've taken to the process of bhakti, it is itself complete. What cannot be accomplished by Sri Harinam, Sri Harikatha, etc., etc.? What can't be accomplished by that? Do you believe there's some deficiency in bhakti? And if we say, no, the deficiency is not in bhakti, the deficiency is in us, and I want to correct the deficiency in me to make myself eligible for pure bhakti. But that's not what our acharyas have mentioned. They've mentioned, regardless of your situation, Srila Prabhupada just went over to the purport, regardless of your situation, come to the arena of pure bhakti. Pure bhakti is fully capable of doing everything. Even Harinam, Nama Chintamani Krishna Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. That Nam is capable of doing everything when it's done in association of pure Vaishnavas, etc. You understand? So there's no lacking from any quarter of what facilities bhakti has to help the jiva. Oh, I'm suffering so much childhood distress because I went through many traumatic situations growing up. Bhakti can help you. Oh, I had so many bad relationships one after another and I've been traumatized for it. Bhakti can help you. Oh, I've undergone very much trauma. I've lost dear loved ones. Bhakti can help you. Do you think Krishna is so unreasonable that Krishna has no account, though he's been with you life after life as Antaryami Super Soul, but he has no consciousness whatsoever about your condition and where you need to come from to obtain his loving service? What then is the meaning of Tesham Satata Yuktanam Bhajatam Pratikur Purvakam? I give what you need to obtain my loving service. If he's incapable of doing it, but it requires some other modality to do it, then he should have referred us, and our acharya should have referred us, well, first go do this, then come to bhakti. And where you find a great deal of pushback against speaking like this is where you will genuinely find attachment to the enjoyment people are experiencing and don't want to give up. They're actually getting some material remuneration, as Srila Prabhupada calls it, from those modalities themselves, right? And therefore they don't really want to give that up. So it becomes difficult for them sometimes to hear these kinds of talks because now it's, oh, so now you're going to make me unhappy again. I was really feeling good, right? I had everything figured out. I was going out doing these sessions and I felt good. They felt good. Even though all the katha was about what you're going through, what I'm going through, but we felt good nourishing each other like that. It was filling so many voids that I had in my life. But the whole idea is to come to trying to apply serving Krishna and thinking, what is Krishna going through? But immediately also, this is one last point. When self-interest is still dominant, we tend to immediately throw Krishna into the classification, he's only Bhagavan. Therefore, you'll hear devotees mostly in this who are attracted to these modalities And don't get confused here. I'm not giving some general blanket statement about every single modality. I'm not, because I don't know every single modality for one, but I do have experience because I was, in a foundational role in presenting a lot of bridge preaching at a particular time. So I'm not at all unfamiliar with it either. But you will find that their tendency is, Krishna is Bhagavan. He's got no problems. Don't worry, he's Bhagavan. So you can't, how will you develop an emotional content to understand the nature of how Krishna is suffering separation in Dwarka from Brijabasis? How you'll have sympathy or some kind of empathy towards the mood of Brijabasis and Gopis, especially in their separation mood? How will you understand the meeting at Kurukshetra after so many years of not seeing Krishna, and Krishna seeing them and them seeing Krishna? How will you digest these things if your predominant absorption is in yourself and any other person in their material activity and their material paradigm? How you'll understand reading Srimad Bhagavatam and applying your emotional adjustment to, oh, how can I serve Srimati Radhika at that time when at Uddhav Kyari she's experiencing so much deep mood of separation? We'll dismiss, no, the Radha and Krishna transcendental is God, no problem. But then how will any bhav come in your heart in relation to that mood? So bhakti is a very deep thing, very deep thing. So we all are unfolding. I'm, again, as I mentioned in the very beginning, I'm also unfolding and trying to mature. So please don't mistake anything I'm saying that I'm already on some level like this or anything, not. I'm saying my aspiration is like that, though. And so we have to have that kind of beginning. I want at least that thing. Do you understand? All right, my Dandavat Pranam devotees. And because this was not really a question and answer session, it was just me speaking on a topic, it's a little different from directly addressing somebody's question. But still, I'm very thankful that devotees, if it's helpful at all, please give me your mercy, give me your blessings. And if anybody found that it was not helpful, please do not take any offense or anything. I'm not at all intending like that. And, please don't make us to be like he's not my friend, etc., etc. I'm only speaking my genuine heart because Srila Rupa Goswami Pad has mentioned the symptoms of exchange of love between devotees, the dati pratagrinati guyam apyati prichati. So what is guya? What is your confidential feelings, realizations, etc.? To a degree, they should be expressed from Vaishnav to Vaishnav. And predominantly, this is a Vaishnav form, so I'm expressing like that. All right. Vancha kalpatarubhischa kripa sindhuvevacha patitanam bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.